detailed description of his grounds for the declaration. All of this came up upon us as something of a surprise on September 11, 2001, when we finally got specific about what we were supposed to be waking up to, or should have gotten specific. President Bush promised to put things on a different footing. Among other things, to the cry of bring them to justice was added the cry, bring justice to them. But regrettably, there was not, in fact, time to work out a long-term strategy and a clear-eyed focus on precisely what it was we were dealing with. It was announced that we were involved in a war on terror, not a war on Islamist terror, and certainly not a war on militant Islamism. And in a sense, it's hard for a number of reasons to blame anybody involved, including the president. This was something that had to be fit into the grid of American domestic life and political history. And we were very much on guard at the time, and still are, against the repetition of our treatment of the Japanese during World War II and of fomenting religious and ethnic tension in this country. We are also a society that is reluctant to examine other folks' religions. And for those two reasons, we shun the notion of a war on any movement that is or claims to be inspired by a religion. Indeed, President Bush went out of his way to avoid inflaming passions, going so far as to tell us that, as he put it, Islam is a religion of peace. Second, there was a sense within the administration that this was not simply about an organization called Al-Qaeda, based in Afghanistan as it then was, but was about a more widespread tendency, although how widespread and precisely what remained unclear. There's been, of course, a great deal of discussion about whether the word war adequately describes the war on terror in either intellectual or practical terms, and I could probably spend all my time here discussing that issue alone. I think it's enough to suggest that it's the most serviceable term that we have, and it's certainly a lot better, in my view, than the term foreign contingency operation, which is the term that's favored by the current Secretary of Homeland Security. And even as I do acknowledge that there are not only intellectual but also practical difficulties with the term, and legal difficulties as well, if we're talking about building a legal architecture that gives the President the powers that he needs and at the same time allows for the kind of accountability for the use of those powers that can sustain them over a long period of time. To put it in very mundane terms, it's very hard to sustain a public awareness of a war when everybody can still make restaurant reservations and go to the movies. Despite a certain lack of strategic focus, there were in fact many successes during those first years, the most notable being that there were, for the next 7+ years, no successful attacks on this country. A great deal of this success, I believe, was due to the CIA interrogation program, which involved sifting through literally tens of thousands of detainees, focusing on those who seemed to have the most potential for providing us with intelligence and questioning them vigorously at times. CIA agents were knowledgeable, and people other than those who actually debriefed the detainees were schooled in what became known in, I think, what is probably one of the worst PR campaigns since New Coke, as enhanced interrogation techniques. Sounds like a wash day product, doesn't it? Enhanced, get the whitest wash on the block. I think harsh techniques, coercive techniques, would have been a whole lot more accurate and in the end a whole lot less harmful, because when you use a euphemism like enhanced, it sounds as if you're trying to hide something that you believe to be horrible and that you're ashamed of. And that was, I think, a disastrous choice. But we actually learned a great deal through the CIA program. In fact, if you focus on only 3 of the detainees, Abu Zubaydah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and Abdul Rahim al-Nashiri, you find that we got a huge trove of information. Zubaydah was a lieutenant high up and close to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and close to Osama bin Laden. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, I think, needs no introduction to this audience. He was the man who planned 9/11, and Nashiri was the man who was the architect of the Cole attacks. To elaborate on some of what we learned, one important thing we learned from Abu Zubaydah, according to George Tenet and General Hayden, both former heads of the CIA, was information that led to the arrest of Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who was the operational supervisor of 9/11, We frustrated an attack on Canary Wharf in England and Heathrow. We got Jose Padilla, known for plotting to plant a dirty bomb in this country, actually prosecuted for something a whole lot more doable and a whole lot more sinister, namely getting apartments in Florida, filling them with gas, and then detonating them using cell phones. We also learned from him that it was okay for members of al-Qaeda, so long as they resisted to the limit, when they reached the breaking point, to talk. And in fact, he said at one point, do this for all the brothers, that is, bring them to the breaking point. And that was something that proved enormously valuable with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed when we finally captured him, because when he finally got to the breaking point, he gave chalk talks. He became a lecturer on the subject of al-Qaeda, on how it was organized, on how it moved money, and on how it attracted adherents. We also learned specific information from him that resulted in the capture of people who were planning to develop a biological weapons capability in this country, and on and on. Nashiri was giving us stale information at the beginning, wound up giving us a whole lot fresher information after he was interrogated by the CIA. So far as devising a way of dealing with terrorists once they came within the jurisdiction of our legal system, that's a somewhat less successful story. President Bush signed an executive order that there would be military commissions right away, but there was a delay in implementing them, due in part to negotiations with our allies, including the British, who at first insisted that their nationals should be tried first, and then objected to many features of the military commissions, which of course would have had to apply to everyone. And in the end, several British nationals were released to that country rather than adjusting the procedures, including some who were plainly guilty of war crimes. When a mechanism was finally put in place, commission trials were ready to begin. The Supreme Court refused to permit the President on his own authority to establish a system of military commissions, and so the Congress obligingly passed the Military Commissions Act. But by the time the legal challenges to that had been exhausted, the principal architects of 9/11 were in custody, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the others, who would never have been captured but for the CIA program. We were at the point where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's trial was ready to start. He had offered to plead guilty. By the time that happened, we had a new president. And President Obama disclosed that he would, number one, close Guantanamo within a year, number two, shut down immediately the CIA interrogation program, and limit interrogation techniques instead to the Army Field Manual, which is generally available on the internet and has been used for decades as a training manual for terrorists, and would shut down military commissions pending a study, which, as far as I know, has not been completed yet. The point of these orders, according to the administration, was to, quote, restore, unquote, standards of due process and the constitutional standards generally, and to retake the moral high ground. I don't know how many of you saw the videotape of the signing of these orders, but there was one moment that I found especially telling. After the President signed the order to close Guantanamo, he asked whether anybody had prepared or drafted an order or any procedures for how it was going to be done, and a voice off camera said that they were working on it. For me, I don't know about for you, a terrifying moment. As regards Guantanamo, it is a military, not a CIA facility. I visited Guantanamo in February of 2008. It is a state-of-the-art